everybody. Hello and welcome to my wonderful guest, Danielle Chamberlin. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Doing great.
Good to have you back again. And thank you everybody for joining. Bok Buddies in the chat. Hello, Alex. I've already hit the like button and have subscribed since you started the channel. Thank you. Mark the Dorset SP is here. Looking forward to this. SP Crusader Leanie's in the house. Good to have everyone here. We are going to be talking about Neil Gaiman, who has been in the news a lot recently. So I want to start by firstly, trigger warning. We're going to be talking potentially about things that might be distressing for some people. So switch off now if you're not up for hearing that sort of stuff. We'll try and keep it fairly light in terms of the way we're talking about it. And also, we're going to have to be very careful with names. I should have mentioned this beforehand, Danielle, because every time I mention a person's name who's a Scientologist in the UK on YouTube, I get a privacy complaint from Peter Hodkin. Scientology's lawyer. And so it's a complicated privacy thing with YouTube. So we're going to talk about people by their first names because that doesn't reveal their full name, which is what they're complaining about. But Neil Gaiman is somebody who is very well known and famous and in the news a lot, so we can say his name. But when we talk about his sisters, his nephew, his family, we'll just use first names, if that's okay with you, Danielle.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. So I wanted to start this off by saying Neil Gaiman there's a lot of controversy around obviously what he's been alleged to have done and whether he is or isn't a Scientologist. And it's without a doubt that his family are Scientologists, and that they're not just any Scientologists. They are possibly the most important Scientology family in the United Kingdom, the Gaimans. And they have been for a very long time. There's a lot of history there. And although we can't decide right now whether Neil is or isn't a Scientologist, we can certainly talk about his family ties to Scientology. And I personally, my feeling is that he's probably left or is kind of on the sidelines and isn't speaking out about Scientology because he knows that he will lose all of his connections to his family and won't be allowed to talk to anybody. But we're just guessing at this point. But you have some experiences with him.
Yes,
right?
Because he has said, on film that he isn't a Scientologist. But what I haven't heard him say is that he was never in. I haven't heard him deny that he was ever in. I've not heard that. It might be out there, but I've not seen it.
Sure.
Yeah, and let us not forget that every single member of his family on that side and from way back when are heavily ensconced in it,
Yeah. Well, let's build a little bit of a family tree here. So Neil Gaiman, whose name we can mention, all the others by first name only. So Neil's mum is Sheila, who is possibly the biggest donor to Scientology in the United Kingdom. She funds all of the ideal orgs. She's contributed millions to the International Association of Scientologists. She has a video on David Miscavige's website where she's talking about how wonderful he is, and she's a very prominent figure in the world of Scientology in the UK. And Neil's dad, David, was once the Guardian, so in charge of the Guardian's office, which is what now is OSA, but for the UK, right? He was
not quite. He wasn't the Guardian. That was Jane. He was the head of PR and communications, effectively. He was the spokesperson for Scientology in the United Kingdom. And he, Herbie, and Jane were the three kingpins at the top.
Yes. Yeah.
And then
so
above them
very
was
important family.
Mary Sue, and then above them L. Ron Hubbard.
And what sort of time period would that have been? That would have been the 60s and 70s, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so then going down the family tree, so Sheila and David had Neil, and they also had a daughter called Lizzie. And
another daughter. So they had Claire first.
Yes. So Claire is over in LA, I believe. She's in the Sea Org, is my understanding to this day.
To Tim.
Yeah.
And Tim's family were at Stonelands with us growing up as children. So there was Helen and Don, and then they had Tim and Alison. And then very sadly, Helen died. And then Don, Helen, and the kids, they moved, they left. I think they were originally, I think Don and Helen were originally Australian. I believe. Oh. And then we got their cat when they left, White Nose.
Really?
If they're listening, lived for many, many, many years.
Wow. Yeah. So that's Claire's side of the family. She stood in the Sea Org in LA, as far as I'm aware. And then Lizzie, so Neil's sister, runs a company called G&G Vitamins, which is still, I think it was started by Sheila actually, but it's currently being run by Lizzie. And that supplies vitamins for all of the orgs in the UK. So when you do your purification rundown, you have to take niacin and all of these other supplements and that sort of thing. And that's all supplied by G&G. And Lizzie's children are people that I worked with at London Org. So all of Neil's nephews, I think all of them, to memory anyway, were all staff members at London Org. So there was Leo, was the Purif IC in charge of delivering the purification rundown at London Org. There was who else was there? There was Ali, who was the Decem secretary. So he was in charge of printing all the promo materials and all of that sort of stuff. Fabrizio, Emilio, Fabio. They are a huge family, and all of the boys were on staff at London Org. I believe a lot of them have now left, and some of them have started their own family. Ali, prime example, he's the one that wanted to marry Louisa, who took the government to court and won the case in the Supreme Court in 2013 in order to get married in the first Scientology religious wedding in the UK. So they're not just people who follow Scientology, they are people who will fight for Scientology and have done it in every generation of their family. So I just wanted to provide that bit of context. But you worked with some of the Gaimans as well, didn't you, Danielle?
Yeah. Well, firstly, just to sort of paint a picture. So there was a canteen at St. Hill, and the canteen was run by Jenny and Rhoda, and they served everybody. All the staff would go for coffee occasionally, or but certainly members of the public would go and get, sandwiches and coffees and sweets and things like that. And that was run by Herbie and David. Then I joined the Guardian's office, and we used to have quite a lot of fun with them. We played with the kids. We went to their house quite often as children. Lizzie dated my brother for a bit. We had parties at their house, and David had a lovely, gorgeous little Jewish grandmother who he built a special home for on the side in the garden at the back of their house. And he ran, when the first London Marathon happened, a whole bunch of us from St. Hill went up to London and had a fabulous day out. And the pictures of David finishing the marathon, I have a feeling like he was one of the very last to come in, but everybody was cheering him in. And, we had a lot of fun times. And they were a fun family. Now, I'm aware that there's some controversy around David and how he treated people and that sort of thing. But for me, always very affable and very kind. Sheila was could be a bit of a battle axe. And I had a little bit of an upset with her a couple of times. She came to Stonelands one day, and in the officers' mess where they all used to eat was this beautiful old wooden table that was in dire need of refurbishment, but it was beautiful and very, very old. And she took it away and had it refurbished. She wasn't even in the Sea Org. So I don't know why it was okay for her to do this, but she did it. And it never came back to Stonelands once it had been refurbished. It went into the pavilion at St. Hill. And it looked beautiful, but obviously very valuable and very, very old. I want to say 1500s, but I'm not 100% sure, but it was very old.
Wow.
And it was just a kind of tossing aside of Sea Org members. Why were we not valuable enough to have that returned to us and have it in the officers' mess at Stonelands? There was just this, a tossing aside of the Sea Orgs. And the Sea Org members, I think we looked down a bit. Jane used to just say to my husband, how are those boys in blue? So we must remember that this family initially lived outside. So they were quite moneyed, and they lived a relatively privileged lifestyle compared to us in the Sea Org. And they went to Michael Hall School in Forest Row, which was private. I know that Neil speaks about a time when he was a young boy where he wasn't allowed to be at the school due to his connections to Scientology, because he was a Scientologist. So I don't know what the outcome of that was, but that did happen at one point. So yeah, I go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say this special treatment is something that runs through the family and continues to this day. Obviously, there was a restructuring with the Guardian's office being turned into the Office of Special Affairs, which is now only staffed by Sea Org members. It's okay to have a Class 5 staff member who's someone that's just signed a 2.5 or a 5-year contract to be the Director of Special Affairs in a city level org. But all of the kind of international management, all of the OSA posts above that are only Sea Org. So there's been a bit of a restructuring, but nonetheless, the special treatment for people with money is something Scientology is widely known for. And this is one of the weird dynamics that London Org particularly had, because it was mostly staffed by the family members, the children or the grandchildren of really big whale families, the big donors. So when they would do something wrong or go slightly off policy or would ignore an order that's been sent down from management, normally, management would come in hard and issue really harsh ethics orders. But at London Org, because they don't want to annoy the people that are propping up all the orgs financially, they got a little bit more leeway than perhaps normal, because it was the Calcioli, the Gaiman family, the Wackleys, the Lysets, and they're all people who contribute financially. So they've got to be careful where they tread the line, I suppose.
Yeah. And we're talking about going way back as well. This is you've got the guy that you knew the people more recently, and I knew the family way back when, but they had come, they did, worked hard. I know that David worked hard for his money. I know that he did. He was a very astute businessman. And when in 1982, 81, 82, Operation Snow White had happened, and the top members of the GO, like Jane and Mary Sue, and I think there were 12 altogether, went to prison. It was around this time that the shit hit the fan and all the execs were pulled off and the CMO was beginning. This is the beginning of the Commodore's Messenger all taking over. And David was declared, and so his family were all what we call potential trouble sources because of their connection to him. And I'm one of those.
I have a piece of paper that says it.
You did. And I had left at this stage. I'd had enough. I'd seen that I'd seen how they treated my mother, and this was not going the way that I wanted it to go for me. I did not want to be part of this. And it was sad because I had been very, very fond of the family. I really did. I did like them. They were nice people. When we, before I left, I was on the rehabilitation project force with Sheila and with Claire, and Neil. He gave me I remember, I've never forgotten this. He was auditing me one day and sec checking me, and I was kind of shocked because I was very naive and quite young, not very sexually experienced at that stage, and he had one of the sec check questions is, when did you last give somebody a blowjob? And I was going, and that was my lasting memory of Neil Gaiman asking me that question on one of the sec check things. And it's like, that's really, I probably didn't even know what one was at that stage.
So how old were you and how old would he have been at that time?
Oh, I was 21, I think.
Right. And was he around the same age?
Yeah, he's a bit older than me. I think Claire's a similar age to me, and Lizzie is younger. Lizzie's about the same age as my brother. So Neil would be, he's a few years older than me. Not much.
But if he's giving you a sec check, that means he's a fairly highly trained auditor, because a security check is like an interrogation, and that's not something you even learn how to do until you're quite far up the bridge on the training side. It's certainly not something that an introductory Scientologist would learn how to do in a local org. So it indicates, at least at that time, Neil was a committed Scientologist and a trained Scientologist, right?
That's right. And also Sheila's sister, Rhoda, she and I were really good friends. I really loved her company, and she's a lovely, lovely person. But she's very, they're just so sweetly and sickly sweetly in love with David Miscavige. You know, he's the best thing since sliced bread, and the same with Aaron Hubbard. And there's no way getting through to them about this, you know. And I traveled every day with her from whenever we went down to St. Mary's when I was still up in East Grinstead. She would give me a lift down there. So we had a lot of time to chat, you know. And she was involved in the CCHR and Citizens what is it? I've even forgotten.
Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
Yeah, and Narconon. And we even went up to the Houses of Parliament together to lobby MPs. And, you know, we had a lot of fun, and they were nice people, you know. Yeah.
And I think this is something that I've said, that I must sound like a broken record when I say this, but I don't care. I'm going to continue saying it. It's that most Scientologists are genuinely good people, and they want to do right by the world, and they think that they're helping. So by sponsoring these campaigns, CCHR, Youth for Human Rights, United for Human Rights, Truth About Drugs, and all of this stuff, they think that their technology is not just the best way of helping people, but it's the only way of solving people's problems on planet Earth. And that's where it starts to become a little bit destructive, because you don't allow for other ways of thinking. But nonetheless, they think that they're helping. It's unfortunate that they only think that because they've been lied to, they've been tricked, they have been deceived. And quite often in implementing Scientology, you end up harming and abusing people, and you don't realize it at the time, but you think you're helping. And I just wanted to put that little caveat in there, that most Scientologists are nice, good people. They have been tricked and lied to. That's not to say they're all perfect. Like, there definitely are bad eggs in the bunch. There are people who have abused people knowingly, but the majority of Scientologists are good people.
Yeah, and they wouldn't. If you were to sit down and tell them your truth and your story, they would not listen to you.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Anything negative about anything, any abuses or anything, it's all down to you pulling it in. And no, they wouldn't listen. You're a declared SP or whatever, PTS. Yeah, they wouldn't have a bar of it.
And just to show how close this family is, you mentioned here about Sheila being entranced, I suppose, by David Miscavige. I'm not going to play the whole video, but this is David Miscavige's website, davidmiscavige.org. There's a bunch of video testimonies, and this is one of them. This is Sheila Gaiman, who is Neil's mother, and she speaks about how wonderful David Miscavige is. Here's a quote: "I think David Miscavige has been the best leader we possibly could have had, and I think Mr. Hubbard was very, very wise to have chosen him as the leader."
Which he didn't do.
It's like I said, which he didn't do. That's a lie, exactly. But I just wanted to demonstrate how close this family is. And there's another one here. Rhoda, who is Sheila's sister, also has a page on David Miscavige's website, and she's very involved in CCHR, and again, another big donor to Scientology in the UK. And she's quoted here as saying, "I've been so impressed with his enthusiasm and his love of life that comes through everything he does." Now, you don't get put on David Miscavige's website unless he approves of it, and he's only going to approve of it if you've donated a lot of money and you've proven yourself to him.
It's so sycophantic, isn't it? You know, and I think this is the thing. I find it so sad that you can't get through to them with the truth, because they've got this impermeable wall around them the whole time, and it's them and us. There's so much them and us in it that they're not willing to listen to people's stories and to find out the truth.
Yeah,
you know, and
because
it's frustrating. No, it's just frustrating that the people they're so lovingly sweet and kind that they're just so easily manipulated. you know?
And you find yourself as a Scientologist in such a cocoon because everybody around you is reinforcing these thought processes and these thought patterns, and everybody's telling you you're wonderful and you're great, except for when you're in trouble, and then they're telling you you're the worst person on planet Earth. But nonetheless, all of your information is completely controlled by Scientology, and you're not permitted to engage in conversation with someone that's seen as a suppressive person.
That's right.
Which I think is a nice little segue into this little snippet that I want to show of something that surprised me. So there's a YouTuber called Nasty Nathaniel, who is a great guy as far as I can tell. I've only had a limited number of conversations with him, and he is a First Amendment auditor over in the States. He visited the UK recently and went to St. Hill, and this morning published a video of him standing outside the gates of St. Hill, and who pulls up? Rhoda, Neil Gaiman's auntie, and he has a little conversation with her. So this is literally just a couple of weeks old. It's only uploaded this morning to YouTube. So I thought I'd share this and just to give you an idea of what happens when somebody speaks to a Scientologist who's considered an SP. Now, it's clear that she doesn't know Nasty Nathaniel is an SP, but it just gives you an idea of her state of mind. So this is Neil Gaiman's auntie.
Hi.
Hello.
Are you a Scientologist?
Are you a friend?
What was that?
What?
Are you a Scientologist?
Of course.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Where are you on the bridge?
I'm right at the top.
Right at the top? Have you gone clear yet?
Oh God, years ago.
Oh, you did OTA?
Yeah.
What was that like? Can you tell me?
Absolutely divine.
Really?
Changed my life. Well, saved my life a few times, and I love it.
Really?
It's all wonderful.
Did you do it on board the Free Winds or?
Yeah.
Oh, really? God.
So you're against it, are you?
No. Well, why would you think that?
Why? Well, why not? Why are you taking this?
We're just vloggers. We vlog. Like I travel around the world, and I'm in England right now, so this is like a very historic place.
Yeah, I can hear the accent.
Yeah. Oh, can you tell where I'm from?
And I'm British.
Well, how about what state? That'll make it a little bit more difficult.
Oh, I don't think you're in New York. Because they just speak through their noses, you know, they speak like that.
Yeah. You did the accent perfectly.
Well, I do acting.
Well, my name's Nathaniel. Nathaniel, yeah.
Okay, I'll look out for you.
And may I ask your first name?
I'm Rhoda.
Rhoda. Okay, Rhoda. Well, nice to meet you. Thanks for sharing your experience with me.
You're well.
I've never talked to somebody who's done OT8 before. I mean, I really think it's interesting.
Right. Well, how do you know about OT8?
Well, I just said, just reading and stuff. Yeah. Just reading books and
Mr.
doing
Hubbard
research.
Is one of the cleverest men I've ever.
What was that?
Mr. Hubbard was one of the cleverest men in the world, and I think he is now being known to be just brilliant.
Yeah. No, I mean he holds the Guinness Book of World Records for.
Yeah, all sorts of things.
Yeah, for I think the most published works or something.
Yes,
I think he owns the Guinness work. Did you ever meet Mr. Hubbard or no?
No, I came just after he'd left.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I must go because I'm in a pantomime.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
It was nice chatting with you.
Go well.
Bye-bye.
So what are your thoughts, Danielle? Because you obviously knew Rhoda.
This is what I mean. It's the same old Rhoda. She hasn't changed. She's not changed. She's always uptone. Always, which we used to say uptone in Scientology. Always bubbly, always friendly. Hi, how are you? Oh, it's lovely to see you. And she's genuine about it. She's genuine. But she is so blinded. So blinded. And the whole family are like that. And it's so frustrating. I did meet up with her. I went to the pub with her and it was lovely, but it's just so sad because, I miss the friendship that we had. We had many, many chats and she drove me quite a few times, there and back. And I really enjoyed the friendship I had with the girls and that sort of thing. And her daughter Jo was at school. She's a bit older than me, but she went to the same school. Yeah, so mixed feelings, really. So sadness, actually, sadness for the loss of the friendship, but also just I wish they would listen to what is actually true, and they believe all the bullshit, and it's so sad.
Yeah,
You know?
and I think what's quite powerful about this video is the fact that, you know, I would love to have a conversation like this with someone outside St. Hill or somebody outside London Org. And there were a couple of times I was able to say hello to people that I recognized as they walked past, you know, the protest that I organized outside St. Hill, or the protest for LRH's birthday, March 13th. You know, I'll see people I recognize, go, hey, how's it going? And because they know I'm a suppressive person now, they just look at me and kind of smile and walk on. They don't engage in conversation because they are restricted. They're not allowed to. And if they do, they will get in trouble. So it's strictly forbidden to have conversations with people who are known to be critics or enemies as the church sees them. So the beauty of this is it shows that even somebody who Rhoda doesn't know is a critic, that allows her to engage in a conversation. And we don't glean much information from it other than she's very clearly a devout Scientologist. But it just goes to show that it's okay to have conversations with people who have differing opinions. We're not looking to harass anybody or attack anybody. Yeah. We just want to, you know, talk to you and just ask questions.
And yet she's still suspicious of him.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just dreadful, isn't it? That you just can't be yourself totally with everybody in the world. You just be so suspicious of everybody. Are they SPs? Can I be talking to them? You know? Yeah. Very sad.
But let's go back to your experience then with Neil and with David and the whole family.
Right. So growing up as kids, we had a lot of fun together. And as I said, we used to go to their house quite a bit. They used to have parties as well, and G&G, the vitamin company. I remember a big party that we had when they're at a different part of the town than they are now. They were up at the top end of the town. Just really fun, just a lot of fun. I remember being at their house, and Neil was, I don't know if it was a barbecue or a bonfire, but he poured petrol on the fire and it went up by his face. I mean, I remember the trauma all around that and the shouting and what have you. And
was he okay? Did he get hurt?
I can't actually remember. Not badly hurt, but certainly singed. I'm sure, certainly singed. You know, but he was a really bright boy. He was really bright. Very clever, but often not around when we were around. The girls were, but he would be in his bedroom reading comics. Right. You know, because he loved to write and read and read prolifically. You know, so he always had his head in a book. And he was good fun. He was good fun. I was always interested in him. He was always very intriguing to me. You know, very intriguing.
Did you get the sense that he was as engaged in Scientology as his siblings? Because it sounds to me like he's not from day one committed and engaged in reading LRH. But if he's reading comics rather than Scientology books, right?
His passion was writing, you know, so he wasn't, that's what he wanted to do. And that is what he ended up doing. And David had lots of contacts and, you know, because he was also the PR head, he had lots of outside contacts. So I'm sure they used those to the fullest extent, you know, probably radio show interviews and things like that. But the girls certainly they weren't in the Sea Org though. You see, this is the other thing. So it was always lovely to go to their house because it was a lovely home. And you got some nice food and, you know, and met some really interesting people. Whereas we came from a very cold, windy, empty, bare floored, you know, Stonelands. So it was good.
With no heating or anything like that.
well, we had brick storage heaters, which sometimes worked and sometimes it was a huge house, no curtains and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
It was freezing. In the
Jeez.
winter, there was ice on the windows. We used to get dressed under under what we said the counterpanes, if you remember them. I don't know if you do. Before duvets, we had counterpanes.
What are counterpanes?
They're kind of like sort of like it's the cover that goes at the top of the bed, but a bit, or you can have like a quilt if you like.
Right. Okay.
But it only fitted on, you know, it didn't go down the sides of the bed. It just fitted on the bed. Oh, anyway. But when I left, I needed a job, and David was doing what we call the A to E, and the family were all declared PTS because of his connections to him, because he'd been declared suppressive. And so he had to do his steps, and he wasn't really that interested in doing them at the time, and he needed someone to help him. So he asked me if I would be his housekeeper and his secretary. And in return, he would teach me about money, and because in the Sea Org, we'd never learned about writing checks or anything like that. So he taught me how to write. I wrote my first check, you know, so I was then writing checks for him and that sort of thing.
A very important skill for any young Scientologist is how to write a check.
Yeah. But living out, you know, so I was living with my sister at the time, who lived, I could walk easily to his house from mine. And it was sad because he was the only one in the house. The family weren't allowed to be there with him. And so I would, you know, I would cook and clean and wash the dishes and do his typing and answer the phone and go and do some chores and, you know, shopping and whatever he wanted me to do. But then one day I was at the kitchen sink washing up, and Sheila turned up, and she had no idea that I'd been working for him. And I don't think David was in the house, actually. I think he'd gone to a business meeting, and I was the only one in the house, and she shouted at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I explained, and then she said, "Get out of the house," and she kicked me out.
Wow.
Yeah. So she kicked me out the house. And I knew why, because, you know, I was supposed to be going back into the Sea Org and that I was leaving Scientology. So I was also persona non grata. I had not been declared, but I was declared PTS because my brother-in-law had been the commanding officer of AOSH UK. And he had left, and I was still connected to him, and he'd been declared. So I was also persona non grata, but that didn't mean anything to me. I had washed my hands of Scientology and I'd walked away, and it didn't mean a thing. But of course, in her mind, this is just awful.
Yeah, and it sounds interesting that she showed up, because if David had been declared and was working on his A to E, then the fact that she would have still been in, Sheila, right, would have been in Scientology. So she probably shouldn't have really shown up.
Well, she was on the RPF. So I had left the RPF
right.
when I left, and she was on, and in order to get back into good standing with the organization, she had to handle her husband. So that's why she was there, because she had to handle her husband. Yeah.
And during that time, did Neil comply with those orders of not speaking to his dad, David, or was he, because we've already established that he was kind of on the fray anyway and not as invested and engaged as the other siblings. Did he follow orders and cease contact?
When I was there, neither three of the children were in touch with their father that I was witness to. It doesn't mean they weren't behind the scenes, you know. It wouldn't have been conducive to his A to E for them to know that I was there. So he was probably hiding me from them as well.
Sure.
But I was unaware.
And also, as kids.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, as kids, they would have been enforced. The policies would have been enforced upon them, and they would have been punished if not. So Sheila, being the good Scientologist that she was and still is, she would have ensured, if there was an order that ceased communication, only she's allowed to talk to David to try and rehabilitate him and bring him back. She would have made sure that Neil and his siblings would have not spoken to David, because she's very militant in her application.
Yeah, exactly. And then a short while later, probably, I don't know, only a week or two later, I was approached by her again, and she asked me to go for a coffee with her at one of the hotels at East Grinstead, the Felbridge. And I did go for coffee, but I knew darn well that the purpose of this wasn't so much to apologize as to try to handle me too and get me to come back in, which is precisely what she did try to do. I can't remember if she said sorry or not. I'm not aware that she did, because then she'd have to be admitting that she'd been wrong. But so I doubt that she apologized, but she did try to get me to go back in again. There was no way I was going to do that. And the sad thing is that my mum, Rhoda had known my mum really well, and Sheila would have known my mother. And my mother was just such a lovely, gentle soul. And when she had her stroke at age 42, and she was treated so badly by the Scientologists, who took her out of hospital before she'd had any medical intervention, which led to her being paralyzed for, you know, in a worse way than she would have been if she'd been taken and been given the meds that she should have had. And Scientology took her out saying they'd handle her, and I could never, ever forgive them for what they did. And if I were to tell them that story, they just wouldn't listen. And it's so terribly sad, because they know how lovely my mother was and what a lovely person. And it breaks my heart that Scientology and their adoration of LRH and David Miscavige has just tainted what is the truth. You know, if they could have seen how my mother was treated, it makes me angry, you know.
Yeah. And how the coercive control techniques that are used, you know, giving people an R factor, right? Convincing someone that, you know, this is the truth. The truth rundown, prime example, is like, no, whatever you experienced is wrong. That didn't really happen. This is what happened. Over time, those sorts of things wear you down. And so we're in a situation now where Neil Gaiman's family are still in Scientology. They fought for Scientology in the Supreme Court so that it would be recognized as a religion for the purposes of wedding ceremonies, a landmark ruling that redefined religion in British law. Huge case. That is all linked to the Gaiman family. And they would only fight for it if they are completely encompassed fully in their mind about Scientology. And let's look at Sheila and Rhoda, for example. Rhoda, she said in that video, she left after LRH had left, but Sheila certainly was around when L. Ron Hubbard passed away and when David Miscavige took over. And it's a well-known fact among ex-Scientologists who were around at the time that David Miscavige wasn't meant to take over leadership of the Church of Scientology. He seized control from Pat and Annie Broker. So Sheila is someone that would have been aware of that and knew about it at the time, but now she's on David Miscavige's website talking about how wonderful he is.
They wouldn't have been aware of that.
You don't think? Because Pat and Annie Broker were the main ones, were they not?
No. I'm pretty certain they wouldn't have known. No. Wow. No, okay. I really don't think so.
Even someone of her seniority.
No, I don't think so. Because remember, Sheila wasn't a SEALG member. And the members of the public, there's a lot that members of the public didn't know that SEALG members did know. I would doubt it. I would have, I don't know what year David died. I remember when I met Rhoda at the pub, I remember her telling me that he dropped his body. Okay, without emotion, and this is what's so extraordinary to me, because they were a really tight-knit, loving family, and I didn't see the emotion. It's extraordinary to me. It's very cold, actually. But Sheila was not a SEALG member. Neither was Rhoda. So there's a lot they would not have known. I mean, even I didn't. I knew Pat and Annie because I'd been on the ship. But I was working for the Guardian's office, and I didn't know what position they held because everything was at Gold, and we were not allowed to know who was at Gold or even where it was.
Right.
You know? And so I don't think, I'd be surprised if they knew. I'd be very surprised if they knew.
Well, in that case, it just goes to show how hard it would be to convince such a person
Yeah.
of the truth. Because if someone was to say to them, David Miscavige never was meant to take over, it was meant to be Pat and Annie, and he seized control, and it was a bit of a coup, she would probably think that that's absolutely absurd because it doesn't match up with anything that she experienced personally, and she was around at the time. And that just goes to show how this manipulation and control works on someone like that. It's just so contrary to anything that she's ever experienced.
Yeah, exactly. And so much that they didn't know because they weren't in the Sea Org, and they weren't, Claire would probably not have, if I don't know how quickly Claire went up the ranks, and what
Claire being Neil's sister, right?
Yes, and so what position she was holding, because she then did join the Sea Org. So what position was she holding when LRH died? I don't know. So it's possible that I think she was in the Commodore's Messenger Org, wasn't she? I don't know, because I lost touch after I left.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
No, I have a feeling she might have been originally. So she may well have known stuff that probably couldn't tell her mother. There would have been things that she wouldn't have been allowed to say. They would have had to sign NDAs and things.
Well, this is another question mark as well, is, when Lizzie and Sheila and, that whole family show up at Scientology events and donate millions of dollars to the IAS or to the Ideal Org program, when they receive medals and trophies from David Miscavige and appear on his website talking about how wonderful they are, it's such a contrast to reality because, Lizzie probably hasn't spoken to her sister in years because she's in the Sea Org over in LA. And that's a very controlled lifestyle where quite often people like that don't have access to the internet or to the outside world. So they're saying it's wonderful and I love my family and my family were Scientologists, but for all she knows, her sister could be getting punished and hate it and want to escape, but she would never know.
Yeah, although we don't know, because they are whales, whether or not they have privileged
Special
access. Yeah, they might well do.
Yeah.
And there are some photos floating around where the whole family have got together at St. Hill. There is a family photo somewhere where they're all there, including Claire and Tim.
But that was probably a one-off, or maybe once a year or so. It's not like they're seeing each other every weekend, like a lot of families do, or at Christmas or anything like that. Even with special privileges, the family is going to be very disconnected, and I think this is possibly why Neil Gaiman hasn't spoken out about his Scientology links, because he would lose all contact with his entire family. Now, it will be interesting to see whether these allegations that have been made, if they turn out to be true in a court of law and it's all comes out that it's all happened and he's a bad person, it will be interesting to see whether Scientology push him out and say he's nothing to do with us, or whether he perhaps doubles down on his and returns to Scientology. It'll be interesting.
And also, I don't know, I know Rhoda's not in the Sea Org, so she probably does listen to the news and things like that, but perhaps it would be interesting to know how they're feeling about things. It must be quite a shock for them.
What was your reaction when you first heard these stories, thinking about, having known Neil as a child? Obviously, these allegations refer to him as an adult, so he may have changed, or he may have been the same person. Like, I don't know. What, from your experience knowing Neil Gaiman, what was your reaction?
Saddened. That was how I felt. I felt sad. But actually, do you know what? I'm not surprised. If they do prove to be true, it doesn't surprise me. Because, I know somebody else I know of somebody who's into BDSM in a big way and had also grown up, but not in the Sea Org, had also grown up in Scientology and knew the family and worked well with them, closely with them. And I do wonder what effect all of that repression, coercion, and control on one's freedom to be oneself completely has on situations like this. So many people now, like us today, have got so many issues that we have to deal with as a result of what we went through. And I see that possibly as being symptomatic of having gone through similar experiences like that.
Yeah, but I think that the difference to distinguish for me is that, you know, BDSM and all that stuff between consenting adults is absolutely fine. What you get up to in the bedroom is your business, nothing to do with me. I don't care. Do what you want as long as it's consenting. The problem we have here is that these women have come forward and said that it wasn't consensual, and that's why it's a problem. And when it comes into whether Scientology was a part of that, I've talked before about how not all Scientologists are abusers, but Scientology creates the perfect environment for a narcissist or an abuser to flourish. You know, if you look at, I use this example a lot because it's easy for non-Scientologists to understand, but bull baiting, right? This drill where you are trying to train yourself not to react to whatever situation. So you're sat in a chair opposite somebody and they have to try and get you to react, flinch, or like, you know, react in some way. So they'll be yelling at you, shouting at you, and you know, that's an abusive thing to do to someone, full stop. However, if you are somebody who is a predator or an abuser of some kind, it gives you an excuse to take advantage of that person because they are supposed to not react to whatever you do. So
exactly.
Scientology creates an environment where these sorts of people can thrive. Now, that is just one example of how Scientology does that. But applying that to Neil Gaiman, we don't know whether the environment has created a predator. You know?
No, exactly. And also put on top of that another layer on this sandwich of sexual repression. And, you know, certainly in the Sea Org, you weren't allowed to, you're not supposed to have had sex before marriage. And, you know, being gay was seen as wrong. So can you imagine that the pressure cooker that these people are living in, that eventually it's got to give in some way? You know, and it could be that it happened once they had kind of got out of this area. And also, we were not taught, we were brought up in this bubble, and we were not taught about the mores and the morals of everyday normal society. You know, we were brought up in this society of rules and regulations, and you're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that. And you believed it blindly. And then suddenly you're free. And then it must be difficult to kind of negotiate your way and navigate your way through life again. And you know, what happens, you know, I've talked about in my other videos what happened to me from that point of view. And you're just suddenly, it's quite a scary place to be because you're allowed actually to do what you want. But there are also boundaries in the wide world outside of Scientology that one has to learn as well, you know. And if you've been sort of contained your whole life, you've still got to navigate that. And if you don't have direction and someone helping you with that, and if you are somebody who, you know, Neil was somebody who's been able to fight and be himself and sort of fight to be different, it's just very interesting to me how you negotiate that.
Yeah, but I think, you know, with Neil Gaiman, he's been out of Scientology, we think, for long enough that, you know, he should have a good grip on how the normal world operates. And you would imagine somewhat, you know, irrespective of a Scientology upbringing, you understand the concept of consent. And so if all of this stuff that's being said is true, it's horrific. And Scientology isn't an excuse for that behavior. I think the reason we're bringing this up in this video is to question whether Scientology had a part to play in his mindset that made him think it was okay to do that. If that makes sense.
And also, I think, Alex, we've got to be careful that, you know, you say he's been out long enough. I'm not convinced that that's actually something that one can say without thinking about how we respond psychologically to trauma, because it can come out in many ways, many years later. You know, it's not.
But it's still not an excuse for for what is being alleged, for what Neil
of course
supposedly
it
has done.
isn't. No, of course it isn't. And it does beg the question of how many others there are out there that haven't yet to be uncovered.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and the reason I brought it up in the way that I did is that if Neil's Scientology upbringing is what created the monster that is being alleged, then that poses the much bigger question of how much harm is this movement, is this belief system doing to people, and how many more people like that are there, right? Same with Danny Masterson, who is now serving time in prison for forcibly, R-wording several women. Scientology played a huge part in that case. It's not because of Scientology that he did it. He did it because he's a monster. But Scientology had a part to play in creating the beast that did those crimes. And I think we have to approach the Neil Gaiman story with a similar mindset. And this is perhaps another case of a predator or an abuser, or whatever word you want to use for it, being allowed to get away with something for years and thinking that that's an okay way to treat somebody because of his upbringing.
Yes, and don't forget that in Scientology, these predators, these sexual abusers, were hidden and given sanctuary by the mere fact that you have this whole philosophy in Scientology that everything that happens to you pull in. So if you are a victim of one of these people, it's not their fault; it's the victim's fault, from a Scientology stance. And that happened to me. It was my fault. And I pulled it in, and nothing happened to the guy
that
who
mindset
did it.
is very hard to crack. That's one of the hard, from my experience, one of the hardest things to crack mentally is, even though I've been out of Scientology for many years, it's really hard to remind myself when I stub my toe or step on it or whatever it might be. My instinctive reaction is like, "Oh, you stupid! Why did you do that?" It's like,
what have I done to pull
quite
this
often.
in?
Yeah, exactly. And that's really hard to train yourself to not think in that way.
Interesting, isn't it? It would be interesting, I think, Alex, if we can find, dare I say the word psychologist, to interview and find out, especially somebody who's dealt with coercive control and cults. It would be interesting to interview them to see what their stance is,
I've got something in the works already on that, Danielle. It's funny you should mention that, actually. There are two. I had Dr. Jonathan Stayer on my channel fairly recently. He is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Alberta, I think, or Calgary, one of those. And he was great. We had a really fantastic chat about Narcanon and mental health misinformation. And we need to follow up and do another video. But then there's also Dr. Alexandra Stain, who's wonderful. I was speaking to her just the other day. She's helping me with something at the moment, actually. And I want to invite her onto the channel to talk specifically about this. So yeah, maybe we can do that together.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I think it's important because I think it's going to shine another light completely on the whys and wherefores of, and what we should look out for.
Yeah. I think one thing is what I just want to mention before we start wrapping up is that, these victims are very brave to have spoken out and come forward about what's happened to them at the hands of Neil Gaiman, and whether or not Scientology had a part to play in his mindset or creating the person that would do these things. We have to look at the fact that, fame and fortune does provide some level of protection for these people. It can feel quite daunting to stand up and say, hey, this person did this thing to me, when they're protected by the Church of Scientology or protected by their notoriety. And I just wanted to kind of just put a point out there to say, if you are a victim of anything like this, whether it's Neil Gaiman or anybody else in Scientology, please, first and foremost, contact law enforcement. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. If it's in the UK, there is no statute of limitations. So absolutely contact law enforcement in confidence. They're not going to share your details or publish them anywhere. If it goes to court, they can obscure your face. You don't have to be there in person. You can do it all anonymously. But it's really important that you know, we get these things on record and they are tried and it goes to court, and there's a track record that then starts to get built up about how Scientology has a part to play in all of these stories. And if you want to speak out and share your story publicly, please consider doing so, because you never know who can be helped by hearing your personal story and going, that happened to me, or I remember that, I was there, or I wasn't there, but something similar happened.
Yeah, and I would ask people, because I do know some people who were essayed in at St. Hill and at Stonelands who've not come forward, and I hope maybe you might be brave enough to step forward and report it, at least, you know, because there's a lot of it, and it's it needs to be brought out into the open if it can be.
And I think what we're starting to see with these major celebrity cases is that can of worms start to be peeled open. We're starting to see more and more people come forward about their experience with notable Scientologists. It just poses the question, how many more people are there out there who aren't famous Scientologists that are doing similar things and have done for years?
Precisely.
So hopefully this is the start of some sort of new movement where people feel confident to come and speak out.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right, Danielle, should we look at some of these questions and stuff I've been starring as we go on?
Indeed.
Yeah. So Juliana Bittencourt, member for 19 months. Wow. Thank you so much. Juliana says, it's a cult.
It is a cult.
Absolutely. Lisa Terry, it's so sad that these nice people like Rhoda are linked to such an abusive cult.
Yeah, but they will never hear it. They will never listen. They will never hear the truth and believe it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Juliana again says that's sad. Yeah, that's my reaction. Hearing your stories of growing up with Neil Gaiman and knowing the family, and my experience of knowing the family and working with them at London Org. Looking back now, it is just sad, because
it is sad,
most of them, the ones that I met anyway, are nice people that have been duped, you know, and I wouldn't wish that upon anybody.
No.
That kitchen witch Suzanne says, hi all, I want to come in and thank you for this. I don't know that I can emotionally handle much more, but I want to come back later and also share this with friends who still adore him and AFP.
Yeah, we mustn't forget that, Alex, that he has millions and millions of adoring fans because his work is bloody brilliant. You know?
It's a shock to a lot of people, but again, that doesn't excuse the behavior or anything if it's true. I'm obviously, we don't know, there hasn't been a trial yet. He's not been proven guilty in a court of law, so innocent until proven guilty. But I am leading on the side. It's not just one person that's come out with some allegations. It's I think 8 women, and they are all very detailed in their descriptions, and they all sound fairly credible, which is concerning. And it just begs to question how many more, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is horrific.
And also, I wonder whether the family know. How much are they being?
That's the point. Yeah, because Scientology views law enforcement as, you know, using the W word, right? They look down on law enforcement. They think their Scientology ethics technology developed by L. Ron Hubbard is the only way to truly rehabilitate a Thetan, because you are a spiritual being and going to prison isn't going to help you. You need auditing. That's what's going to save you as a person. And so whenever a Scientologist is accused of something, their instinct is to go, oh no, this is just, you know, the W word system. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's irrelevant. What's irrelevant is salvaging them as a spiritual being. Which is, again, just horrific, because what it does is it like minimizes the actual offense that has been caused, that has happened, right? And it's a shame that Scientologists will probably be looking at this going, oh, it's just the media targeting another Scientologist, you know, they're not to be trusted or believed, rather than looking at it as a concerning issue that's happened. Alrighty. Lupita T says, hi, I'm lurking today. Nice t-shirt. Saw it on Threads. Thank you. I thought this would be appropriate for today. First time I've worn one of these in a while. Bok Buddy says they wouldn't kick him to the curb publicly. I believe they would have just doubled the regging. Yeah. What do you reckon the likelihood is that his mum, Sheila, and his sister, Lizzie, and the rest of the family have been pulled into a room and said, look at the mess your brother or son has created and the possible PR flap this causes for Scientology. You need to go into ethics and you need to donate more money. What are your thoughts?
You know, it wasn't happening as badly as that when I was still in. You guys have probably got more experience of that than I do, but I can't. I can imagine it happening.
Yeah, without a doubt, because you've done something to pull this in is going to be the mindset, right? And therefore you have to pay to fix it.
Yeah.
You know, when you get accused of something in Scientology and you're told you have to do an ethics cycle, you have to do a reparations project or whatever, it's not free. You have to pay for the privilege of re-earning your place in the group again.
Hey Alex, maybe the Sunderland roof won't get built now.
That's the point. Yeah, because the roof at Sunderland Org was funded by Sheila, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh dear.
All right, last couple here. MX Mandy McGee says, how is he not disconnected from his family? Well, I think it's just because he hasn't spoken out. And that is the kryptonite for a Scientologist. If you were to publicly say anything about Scientology, you are instantly considered an enemy and then disconnected. So I think perhaps that's why we haven't heard Neil
and
come
he's
out
a big celebrity. He's a huge celebrity.
Yeah,
they're treated differently.
But even being a celebrity, being treated differently, Nicole Kidman obviously got a massive free pass when her father is a psychiatrist. But as soon as she left Tom Cruise and therefore Scientology, she was declared as a suppressive person. Her children, Tom Cruise's children, aren't allowed to speak to her, or at least they weren't when I was in. And I worked in the org with. Well, Bella Cruz, Tom Cruise's daughter, was a public at London Org while I was there, and she never once mentioned her mother. So yes, they get a free pass in some ways, but the threat of disconnection will affect anybody and everybody. Tom Cruise himself has disconnected from his daughter Suri, right? So that's probably why Neil Gaiman hasn't publicly condemned Scientology, because he doesn't want to be disconnected. Kirby's mum gifted an apostate Alex membership. Thank you, Kirby's mum. That's very kind of you. Whoever received it, make sure you thank Kirby's mum. SP Crusader Leany says, it's all very sad and disturbing. Thank you, Danielle. And Alex is not an easy subject.
That's right. It's not.
Yeah. And finally here, Nisa says, no one ever questioned things like these and would think it's probably all right when in reality it's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and Danielle for coming along and speaking about this. I know this has been a tough subject, but I think...
Well, you know, Alex, today is the anniversary, if I can say, of my mother's death. So she passed away 6 years today. And I don't want to ever forget how they treated her, and I will never forget how they treated her. And we must never forget the abuses and the perpetrators of those abuses. We must not let go of it. We've got to get them to agree that it happened and to make reparations and to apologize.
Yeah, and hold them accountable. And that's where the power is in speaking out, right? And sharing your story. And it's not for everybody. If you don't want to speak out about your experience, absolutely fine. You don't have to. But if you are witness to something, if you knew about something happening, if you're a victim yourself, even if it was a long time ago, at least report it to law enforcement, because the more people that do that, the more evidence there is of this being a systemic issue with the way the Church of Scientology operates.
Yeah.
So, Deanna Ross here just says very quickly before we wrap up, what was your mum's name?
Oh, Jenny Bunting. Jenny Brody before then. And also, can I just say that what was I going to say now? I was going to say something I wanted to end with. No, it'll come back. Don't worry.
Sorry for cutting you off.
No, don't worry. It's fine.
But
I'm sure.
I was just talking about, accountability and reporting to law enforcement, and just how important it is that you do that. And you don't have to speak out if you don't want to.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
No, that's right. Yeah, don't worry. Another time. I'm sure I can think of it another time.
All righty. Well, Danielle, thank you so much, and thank you for being so brave in coming on today. I didn't realize it was an important anniversary, and you're very brave in doing this. Thank you. And for just think about the message that this sends to other people who were victims of certain things in Scientology. Is look at Danielle. Danielle is thriving in her life. She's doing great, and you know, you're a shining example of someone who's lived a happy, successful life outside of Scientology.
And it can be done.
Nothing bad has happened to you from speaking out about your experience. So I hope that encourages more people to do the same.
I remember what it was. So when I did my article on this in the Sun, I just want to express my dissatisfaction and my anger about the response that Scientology had to it, saying that I was not genuine and that
not credible, I think was their words.
Can you remember? They're not credible, and it was inflammatory. Yeah. That's the best they could come up with, and that it wasn't true. Now, when it is true, and it is my truth, and I know it happened, and there are witnesses to it having happened, I was very angry with them when they responded in that way, because they're taking no responsibility whatsoever for any of the abuses. So rather than apologize or accept any form of liability, they come and attack you, and that is what they do.
Yeah,
you know,
and if you if you piss them off enough, they start literally making stuff up about people. You know, this is something they create hate websites. There's massive fair game against me at the moment, and it's turned a corner in the last couple of days where they've literally started making things up and putting false statements on websites and in tweets and so on. And it just goes to, like, what church does that, right? It's one thing to deny that something happened. It's another to attack a victim of abuse. It's another thing entirely to then start making stuff up about it in a full-scale attack against these people. And it's just horrific. And I pointed this out on Twitter yesterday. I was like, isn't it ironic that we are here calling out Scientology and asking for an end to their abusive practices, and their response is to further abuse us in the way of harassment? And it's
exactly, there's got to come a point where somebody says enough. Why are they being allowed to get away with all the hate? It's not okay.
Enough is enough, and that's why we're here doing what we're doing, right? And you know, we've got to carry on flying that flag, as Mike Rinder put it, and carry that torch and finish the job, right? And by that, I mean put an end once and for all to the abuse that's going on. I don't care if you're a Scientologist, you can practice Scientology for all I care, but you can't do this sort of stuff and allow people to get away with it. That's not okay. The behavior is what we're protesting.
Yeah.
Danielle, thank you so much. Thank you everybody in the chat for watching. Don't forget to give the video, even though it's a difficult subject and you might not want to give the content a thumbs up, give the video a thumbs up or a thumbs down, because that helps spread this message out to more people. And that's what we want to do, is reach more people with this important story and message. So yeah, thank you so much, guys. And thank you, Danielle. And we'll see you on the next one.